My guest today is Shane Snow. He's an award-winning journalist and entrepreneur, three-time best-selling author and explorer. Shane's writing has appeared in GQ, Fast Company, Wired, and The New Yorker. He is a world-renowned keynote speaker on the art and science of innovation, teamwork, and storytelling. His current ventures include being CEO of Showrunner, chairman of Snow Academy, and a board member at Contently. Shane has helped expose gun traffickers and government corruption, climbed up abandoned buildings around the world, and eaten only ice cream for weeks in the name of science. He's performed comedy on Broadway, produced award-winning films, and founded various companies at the intersection of media and technology. So, welcome to the podcast, Shane.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Before we dive into our questions, for the benefit of the very few listeners and folks watching this who may not be familiar with you and your work, do you mind giving us a brief overview?
Sure. So the resume version is I studied business and computer science in undergrad. I went to journalism school, started writing about technology and business for Fast Company, Wired magazine, places like that, and freelanced everywhere, and was inspired by all the crazy tech companies I was writing about as a reporter, and started my own tech company. And then I wrote a couple of books about lessons in business from kind of a science standpoint, a human behavior and innovation as applied to business. And then kind of went back and forth between that those two worlds a couple of times. Journalism and writing, back to doing business. I did a couple of companies, and now I am running a tech company that's in the film industry. So we're helping introduce new technologies to film sets, and and so I've had this kind of this career that's always centered around business and technology and storytelling.
Yeah. We'll talk more about Showrunner, Snow Academy, and is it pronounced Contently? Is that...
Originally it was pronounced Contently. Everyone said Contently, and that's friendlier, so that's what we went with. Many years ago now.
All right, so we'll talk more about that. But among the things that you've done in your life, one is you've helped expose gun traffickers. I want to hear more about that. You've climbed buildings. You've been on Broadway. But before you talk about that, the one thing that sort of intrigued me is this notion that you ate ice cream for weeks in the name of science.
Yeah. So nothing I do in my career will be as popular as this article I wrote for GQ about how it was. There's this ice cream called Halo Top that is now a major brand. I think they're worth like $1 billion or more. And at the time, they were just in some small specialty stores in Los Angeles area. And I did the math. I looked at the label on this ice cream that a personal trainer friend introduced me to, and I said, hey, you could eat like 5 or 6 pints of this a day and lose weight because there's no calories in this ice cream. And it actually tastes good. It tastes better than you think a low calorie ice cream would. So I'd been writing for GQ, and I told my editor about this ice cream, and I said, I want to eat this ice cream for a couple of weeks and see what happens. And so I documented that. I interviewed nutritionists, and I had my personal trainer, and I brought ice cream with me everywhere and ate it 5 times a day, and I lost over 9 pounds, and I got canker sores, and I was vitamin deficient, and so I documented, this is not a good idea, but ice cream doesn't have to be so bad for you, basically. And that article went viral, and people started, talking about the ice cream diet, and then people started talking about how the ice cream diet is not good and you shouldn't follow it. And the original article didn't say anything about how this was a good idea. It said it was a bad idea. But Halo Top, I had interviewed them for the article about, how they started. And, they called me up and they said, hey, if you ever want free ice cream. And I said, technically this is a journalistic endeavor, so I cannot accept that. But it sounds like you guys, like business is going well as a result of some of this exposure. So that's the story.
So, do you have a favorite flavor?
I mean, the mint chip, I think, was the best at the time. They were very limited at the time. They had like 3 or 4 flavors. I didn't like the vanilla. The chocolate is always a good one. But what that story and that whole endeavor is sort of, and you kind of got at it, just a minute ago. It's emblematic of what a lot of my career has been, which is finding excuses to do things so I can write about them. Yeah. And then writing about them so that I can hopefully learn something that helps me with business or helps other people. And this was one where it's hard to find the excuse beyond writing about it. Eating only this ice cream and seeing if you lose weight and seeing what happens to you, it's for the story itself.
Right.
But I've done a lot of those kinds of explorations into things like getting my brain electrocuted to like understand how new therapies are coming about for targeted electroshock essentially, and what that means for mental health. There's a lot of things that I've done in that vein where I'm the test subject because I'm interested. I want to know what this is like because I want to write about it and then eventually help people. The
Yeah.
ice cream being kind of a lark
Yeah.
among a lot of other projects like that.
That's great. As a fellow journalist, I often hire interns out of Northeastern University or Quinnipiac or name the journalism school. And I tell them, for me, the key component, the key thing to success is just to be eternally curious. And it
Absolutely.
strikes me that you have developed this innate sense of curiosity.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a big driver for me. And I think, you know, like I said, you can learn from exploring things, even if they seem to have nothing to do with, what you're actually working on, or what your job actually is. And I think if you look hard enough, or if you are curious about things, you can one day always look back on the stories that you explored or the things that you did and find ways that they kind of enrich your perspective. And yeah, that's been very important to me.
Yeah. So I want to talk more about content creation, storytelling, and whatnot. But just one quick story, which is my wife and I, we actually had to stop eating ice cream
Mm,
nightly because we were gaining so much weight in addition to all the other normal breakfast, lunch, dinner stuff that we were doing. And, uh, and though I love ice cream, I had to sort of stop because it was adding pounds to my, to my girth.
it only works if you're replacing something else with it. It doesn't work if it's just adding on to your daily calories. Yeah.
Yeah, so although I have to say it sounds better than paleo, than the Beverly Hills diet, than Atkins, or
Oh
name the
yeah.
diet that I think I may have to try it just for the
Yeah,
sake.
with some vitamins, maybe like with a healthy breakfast added. Yeah.
All right, well, so our audience, it's largely financial advisors. They
Hmm.
work for the Merrill Lynches of the world. They work for registered investment advisors. And in your book, Dream Teams, you talk about the importance of diverse perspectives and backgrounds in creating successful teams. Many of the advisors who will be listening to this podcast are not necessarily solo practitioners. They're part of a team, and one member might be the retirement specialist, one might be the estate planning specialist, another might be the tax specialist or the investment specialist. Can you elaborate on how to create a successful team?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, what you said right there is sort of the default way that we form teams. We have like a big goal for in this case business, or helping investors, or people manage their money. Um, and so there's a set of goals that a group of people comes together to accomplish that, and we often staff our teams based on your area of expertise. There's the accounting expertise, there's the planning expertise, there's the whatever, and we do that. I In the tech industry, I a lot of my examples come from that. You're building a website. You have the designer, you have the person who's writing the code, you have the person who's writing the marketing copy that goes on the website, the person taking the photos. That's normal in teamwork. You see that in sports as well. You have the point guard and the center, and people with different areas of expertise. But and that's great, and that's sort of the core underlying idea of what makes a team stronger or better than one person. What can possibly make a team more than the sum of its parts is by combining different things. If you have a group of people who all think the same, are the same, have the same skills, they will only be as smart as the smartest person in that group. But if you have a group of people that think differently, then the group can together come up with things that no one person could come up with. So that's the underlying idea that I explored in Dream Teams. This idea of cognitive diversity, and it's what gives you different ways of looking at things, what gives you that expertise. It's living a different life, having experienced different things. A lot of that is going to be a function of who you are, how people treat you, where you grew up, the generation you grew up in, those kinds of things. And but it goes deeper than that, and that's where I think things get interesting, because everyone builds teams by saying, you do this job, you do this job, you do this job. But there's more to innovation and like real problem solving, making breakthroughs, than that kind of default, the more diverse perspectives beyond that sort of narrow area of expertise that someone can bring to problem solving or to a team, the more likely it is that you'll add up to more than the sum of your parts. So that's very abstract. Real example, my current company, Showrunner, we have an engineering team, people who are writing code, and we could do what a lot of companies do and, recruit a bunch of engineers from the college of our choice and look at their resumes, and that's fine. And maybe some have little expertises that are different. But we specifically, when building this team, we tried to source people who had different life stories. We tried to get that out of the interview process. So we have a guy who was in the British Army in Bosnia, who has this crazy story of his career in the military, and he stepped on a landmine, and he's been through all sorts of stuff. He's been a leader. He's been part of VA programs, and he has a whole life that he's lived outside of his writing code and being a good engineer. And as we got to know him, we basically said, hey, we like the fact that you have this experience. Draw from that. We have another engineer who is in barbershop quartets and has wired up his whole home to be a smart home. We have another engineer who's she's a CrossFit instructor, and so she has this really great coaching ability and understands, CrossFit is very dangerous if you do things wrong. She understands how to coach people to the point of growth, but not past the point of danger. And so, yes, they're doing a specific job, but we've reinforced this idea in the recruiting process that we want people who are bringing more things. So when there are really thorny problems to sort out, we know that people are drawing from a wider sort of cognitive pool than just like we all kind of have lived this same life. And so in Dream Teams, I go through the kind of the psychology of that. There's actually mathematical models around this stuff that folks have done. But then also just, story after story in history of how, it's great if you have a sports team where people have different, abilities. But when you have two coaches that are very different, talk about the Soviet hockey team from the 70s, the Miracle on Ice story, this hockey team that no one could beat. The sort of less known part of that story is the two coaches. One was this like drill sergeant type, worked them super hard. And one forced them to take like ballet classes and learn karate and do like ninja rolls. And so this team had this choreography experience and this combat experience that other hockey players didn't. And that added to their ability to sort of thwart the opposing teams. And that was a function of that cognitive diversity that the two coaches brought. So that I sort of monologued there, but that's the underlying idea of this diverse perspectives.
Yeah. So I guess two questions. One is, I guess on the hiring side, it's really important not just to know that someone has expertise in investment management or security analysis or whatever the case may be, but that they have come to the table with other things that you might not have thought central to the position, but could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think including. And it can be anything. It can be having lived in different places, so you understand how people live different ways, and that's okay. It could be someone who, if everyone on your team has a perfect track record, you might encounter situations where it would benefit you to have someone on the team who is really messed up and has learned that lesson. And so that they can see the waterfall that no one else sees, someone who's made a very, very bad investment decision and, has now proven that they don't do that as by way of pattern, but understands what to look for, in places that someone who's not lived that experience might not have. That's just an example. I actually don't know, if anyone listening to this is like, wow, I don't want to do that. But that kind of thing, or very least in your brain trust, when you're making decisions, tapping into people who have those kinds of perspectives can be really, really valuable. If not, just on the hiring, on the who you consult when you're making big decisions, who are your inputs into your process, you can add that same kind of idea there as well.
Yeah. So let's say, for sake of argument, your team is assembled. Everyone came out of Harvard with an MBA. They all look alike. They all wear blue blazers and white shirts and red ties. As a leader, would you be encouraging your folks to sort of go out and acquire diverse experiences, go climb mountains, go jump out of airplanes, go fly fishing in Montana? I mean, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. And, what's under the surface often, is you don't expect. Some of those MBAs from Harvard could have lived very different lives, and so shouldn't discount that. But there is a chance that they have a lot in common, and that something down the line that you will need will not fit into that common, set of experiences. So absolutely,
Yeah.
encouraging exploration, taking sabbaticals. One thing that in some of the research that I've done, most of this is not my original research. I'm just, packaging it and connecting dots. There's a lot of really interesting stuff around how reading from diverse sources, like novels, and watching different types of television programs actually can have this effect as well, sort of like expanding your potential perspectives you can draw from, or just making you a little more open to considering different perspectives. So if you always read crime novels, if you go ahead and read some romance novels, or read some start reading the newspaper from a different country, that actually can be useful in this sort of expanding your own cognitive diversity. But yeah, reading in particular, there's some fascinating stuff about even just reading more, because different stories have different things that you can draw from.
Yeah. I haven't dove into the South Korean television series yet, but it's on the list. The other thing is a lot of teams, focus on sort of tests, whether it's DISC or Colby or other things. Any thoughts about the use of these sort of tests and to sort of get a sense of how well people work together or how well they
Yeah,
won't work?
yeah. There's something that, and one of the big things that comes up actually when you start talking about this topic of, people who think differently are the ones who have the most potential, is if you think differently, chances are you operate differently, you work differently, you have different personalities, you have different values, different priorities, and that butts right up against culture fit and like harmony and smooth operations. And so this sort of second sort of challenge of a dream team is, how do you get people to engage in productive ways even when there are those differences? And so I think these tests, the accuracy of some of these tests, is highly disputed. But if the tests are used as a way to reinforce, hey, we appreciate people from all the spectrum of what, the outcome of these tests can be, and we seek to understand how people operate so that we can get the most out of that, I think that's really positive. There's different personality tests that I buy into differently, but if I know that you do your best thinking alone in the morning, and because of that I don't schedule meetings with you in the morning so that I can accommodate that, that is building a lot of benevolence and goodwill in our team, and that's kind of leaning into the idea that our differences are important. If you and I have a conflict about something that we believe or want to do or whatever, if you believe that I'm going to be benevolent to you because I've been accommodating and trying to help you work best, then we can have that debate or conflict in a much more respectful and productive way than if we kind of think that we push comes to shove, I'm going to pick me rather than you or rather than the team. And in that conflict, understanding how you roll, like understanding the outcome of your personality test, hey, this is how you communicate, or this is what's important to you. If I understand that, I can approach this in a way where I'm not furious when you don't react how I would react.
Yeah.
I had a manager one time, two managers who had this issue with each other. They were having a lot of conflict. Their teams needed to do a lot of work together. They were having a lot of conflict that was turning personal. And when I figured out, one of my mentors helped me sort of get to this. When I figured out that a big source of this was the design leader did not like, kind of shut down when there was a direct confrontation, especially when it got heated. And the marketing manager got heated very quickly, and then would later kind of regret some of the things that he would say and come back and apologize. When I realized that, or when I sort of learned that, hey, both things are just these are people, and this is how they initially operate, then I could come in and help coach, like, hey, so you understand you, and so you understand you. When there's conflict, here's how we can sit down and like take time and come back and address it in a productive way. And I was able to do this without approaching it from a, hey, feeling strongly is wrong, or hey, withdrawing is wrong. It's like, hey, we all have these tendencies, so let's find a way to work together because we all care. So that I think is the big benefit. The outcomes of these tests aside, and red and yellow color codes or whatever, I don't care about as much as this helping us to operate from this point of view of like, oh, we are different and that's great, and we're going to work with that rather than just stack up with certain types of people.
Yeah. So we're all trying to create a dream team, but there comes a point where maybe we can't resolve these differences, and you have to you have to boot one of the team members. Like, at what point does that happen in your world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very human psychological thing or sociological thing that we don't like the team to fall apart. We don't want to be kicked out of the group. We don't want the village to disband. And so there is this natural bias towards like we got to keep the team together. And the reality is, different teams at different points in time are solving different problems and benefit best from different people. And so I think people coming and going is actually more okay than as a society we kind of accept. At the same time, a team that's been working together really well and is in lockstep and is bringing all these things that we're talking about gets better over time if they're importing new perspectives. So the kind of mnemonic that I use, and I forget where I got this, and I wish I could give credit here in this form to where this originally came from, but I made a little flow chart kind of encapsulating my version of this, that when you have someone who is causing a negative effect on the rest of the team, that's when you need to jump into action as a leader. And there's 3 T's that you can do. You can train them to have the positive effect again, or train the team to compensate someone who's having a negative effect on the team. It might be because the rest of the team needs to accommodate them, right? They're the one who doesn't fit, and that's why they're so valuable. But you can either train people to deal with it in a productive way. You can terminate the person so that they're no longer having a negative effect, or you can tolerate the negative effect. And that is the only wrong answer, because that erodes your credibility as a leader, and it makes the rest of the team understand basically that bad behavior will be tolerated, even if it affects other people on the team, and that's not good. So if you can train people, that's great. But if you need to terminate someone for the benefit of the team, that's also the right answer in many cases. So that's my rubric generally.
All right. So the financial advisors who will be listening to this podcast, they are in some ways storytellers, right? They're talking to their clients and prospects about the retirement that they could have, or the colleges that they'll be able to fund for their kids, or the vacations that they'll be able to take, et cetera. So how do you approach this process of storytelling, and what are some of the key elements that you believe are necessary for a compelling story, especially as you think about advisors listening to this?
Yeah. So there's a lot of great, and it's just getting better and better, but there's a lot of great science about why we humans are so drawn to stories. Why do we watch so many movies? Why do we use stories to connect with each other? You meet someone new, you sit down for lunch, you share stories of your life. Why is that so built into us as humans? And there's 2 things that I always come back to that I think are the main answer to your question. And it's that stories help us remember things better than just facts. More of your brain is firing, filling in gaps, imagining when you hear a story than when you see a list of numbers. And it's easier for you to remember that, to grab onto that memory. So storytelling helps with memory encoding. And the other thing is that storytelling helps us pay attention and care about things. So, at a certain point, a list of facts is going to stop piquing your brain's interest. You got to really try. You use willpower to pay attention. But a story with the right elements can keep your attention, keep you going. And so, what are those elements? It's basically what gets your brain, your subconscious brain, to feel like this is important, which is basically like an emotional reaction. Novelty makes your brain think that something is exciting or potentially, dangerous or useful. Relatability is an element of storytelling of like. Basically, it helps you pay attention, but it creates this underlying emotion of essentially empathy. You hear a story that is about someone who reminds you of you, or reminds you of someone you care about, you're going to pay more attention because that empathy center is starting to activate in your brain. Stories with tension, you set up a big problem, or some anxious outcome could happen that triggers a little bit of anxiety. which tells your brain, hey, this is important to solve or to get to the outcome, get to the end of this. And then I always talk about making things easy on people, making people feel smart, feel satisfied with the story, so it's easy to understand. And I have this little story that I've been telling lately that kind of gets at some of these that hopefully can help people remember, which is I once spilled a drink on Brad Pitt. So the story is I just started drinking. I was not very good at it. I got invited to a gala, and I was 2 champagne glasses in, and way more tipsy and sloppy than you should be. But I was new to this, and I turn around and I hit my drink into someone, and it turns out to be Brad Pitt. And instead of freaking out on me, he orders me another drink, shakes hands, we have a nice conversation, and all is solved. And Brad Pitt, it turns out, is the greatest guy ever.
Yeah.
So that story is not true at all. Completely made up. But yeah, I like this because it illustrates. First, I started out the story with I once spilled a drink on Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
That's tension. You immediately want to know this story. You want to know the outcome of this story. What happened? Did he get mad? How? I then back up and I give context. I was new to drinking. I had 2 drinks and it was a little much. Anyone who can relate to that has been there. Usually, you're 21 or 18 or whatever, and I was actually 29, when I started drinking. So, but everyone can kind of relate to that feeling. And so it's like, okay, like you're getting into the story, your brain is paying attention. And then, we come back to the part where I spill a drink on, guess who it is? It's Brad Pitt. There's novelty there. And then the outcome is, it turns out that he's nice about it. He orders me a drink. He's magnanimous, charming. You're satisfied with that. And that is sort of a novel way that the story could wrap up. As in a business context. So I tell that story because that's half the people listening to this are going to remember the Brad Pitt drink spilling story as a way to remember this lesson that I'm trying to impart. Yeah. But with your clients, when a client has a concern, sharing the story of someone who had that same concern and how the outcome was surprising in a good way is a way that you can use storytelling to help them remember you, to help them remember the answer to their concern, and to pay attention to what you're telling them. And you can start the story out with something, with an element of tension. Like, yeah, so I had this client that the situation was dire, and here's what happened, and and then help them relate to it. That's a very common one, I think, in sales. Another thing is someone has a goal, maybe not like a concern, but a goal, and they're meeting with you about their goals, and you want to do business with them. Sharing stories about yourself is something very relatable. How their goals can map to are similar to your goals starting out, or people like them again. That's sort of the easiest way to start with the kinds of scenarios that you're talking about. You can apply these elements and these principles to everything from writing, as writing journalism, getting people to dig into your story, get beyond the headline, all the way to presentations. You want people to not be on their phones during the presentation, weaving in stories to get them to perk up and pay attention and to have something to hang on to later to talk about with their colleagues later. The same underlying things all apply.
Yeah. Not for now, but for another time, I actually did spill a glass of red wine on the white rug of Ewing Marion Kaufman's mansion. Ewing Marion Kaufman, who was at one point the owner of the Kansas City Royals. I was in his house, and he asked me, why the heck I was a Red Sox fan, and he called me over to explain why I was a Red Sox fan instead of a Royals fan. And I was so nervous, I tripped on the white rug and spilled the red wine.
Oh no!
And he was gracious, but like Brad Pitt, he was gracious about it. So he was like, "Pay no attention; the cleaners will get it, or I'll throw it away and buy another one." I don't know, whatever he said.
Well, so now I'm going to remember that story first of all, and I'm going to remember Red Sox fan. In part, the red wine helps illustrate, helps solidify that with me.
It was red wine on a white rug. It was so embarrassing. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm all of whatever, 24 years old." And I just spilled wine on this multi-millionaire, famous Royals owner. All right, so here's the other question. The follow-up is so I'm the advisor, I'm telling stories, but is the same true in reverse? Do I want to hear the client's story, their life story, or their whatever? Do I want them to give back to me their stories?
Absolutely. I mean, storytelling, sharing stories about ourselves and about the people or things we care about is a way that we connect. Right? You build relationships that way. So you want to do that because you want them to know you care. You want to care. And if you don't care about someone because you don't know them yet, getting to know them is a way to care. So yeah, digging into people's stories is useful on that front. Stories build relationships. They make us care. The other thing too, though, is getting to know someone's story will help you understand all the little things that make them up as a person that can help you with finding the right solutions for them, right? Like, again, if we're talking about sales, um, or problem solving for a customer or for a client, um, understanding the little details can help you make sure that you're either framing what you're pitching them in the right way, or that you're finding the right solution, or finding the right partners to put together that right solution. I think that's absolutely crucial. I'll say, like with the Brad Pitt story, a story doesn't have to be true to have this effect on our brains.
Yeah.
And that's something where I would add some caution. Fiction can impart lessons. Parables are great for helping us to remember lessons. And you can watch a fictional movie and care about a group of people you didn't care about before, even though the story is not true. I care about wizards because I read about Harry and Hermione, and like, those are not real characters, but I like Daniel Radcliffe because of it. Like, it's weird that our brains do that. But stories can also be used to help people remember things that are wrong or that are, bad, and they've been used by, villains throughout history to demonize people. And so I think if you're on the other end, if we're talking about the context here, like, you're not really dealing with dictators trying to demonize people when you're selling financial solutions. But if you are, I would say all of us are making business deals, we're forming partnerships, we're trying to get jobs. If someone is trying to sell you a story that sort of piques something in you, that something is off here, that is your brain telling you to pay attention to that too. And I think we can use stories to motivate people, to help people remember, to get people to care. We should also understand that that people can sell us stories to get us to care, and we should still use our heads when making decisions. And I think that is maybe a trap that often people who are, I would say, in my own experience, when selling, we can fall into the trap of, I'm using stories to get people to do stuff, and then people's spidey sense go off, and it's like, hey, if you're trying too hard, people will tell, and that can backfire, because they know that they don't want to be tricked. And so being as genuine as possible and listening, and this is where, coming back to your real question, listening to people, what they're actually saying, rather than jumping into your next persuasive story, counts for a lot in helping them to see that you're being genuine and not just trying to hoodwink them.
Yeah. As you were talking, Shane, I was reminded of a very famous Boston Globe columnist who I won't name, but the tagline for him was, "Never let the facts get in the way of a good story."
Oh man, it's a bummer of a tagline.
But he was well read, I guess. So the next question has to do. It sort of dovetails on what we've been talking about, and I'm fond of this notion of asking great questions. And I'm often reminded when I think about this is the famous Nobel Prize winner. When he was awarded the Nobel Prize, he was asked to what did he attribute, winning the prize, and he said that his mother would send him off to. I'm paraphrasing. His mother would send him off to school, not saying give good answers, but ask good questions. Yeah, right. It's a great story.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's not. I believe it's largely true. Anyway, any tips for helping people learn how to ask great questions, either in a formal interview setting or just in everyday conversations?
Well, I would say I'm impressed by how you ask questions, and it makes sense that you do this for a living. There's a few common pitfalls, I think, and then there's a few, I think, just really smart heuristics that I would say. Doing your homework, so you're not asking questions that someone could just look up, that is important. It's also good for the relationship building part of, like, hey, I've done my homework. This is what I think I understand about you, or whatever it is we're talking about. Here's the question I have. And then if you're wrong, there's at least some that they can help you out with that, and you learn the answer, but you're not wasting people's time by asking things that you could just find out. What's the company website? You could figure that out. And we do that a lot when we're trying to do a good job, and it's, it's okay. But that's one pitfall. Another pitfall is asking multiple choice questions when just asking a question will do. And this, what you don't want to do when you're trying to find out information is limit the possibilities. And unless you're trying to, if you're looking for the answer to a multiple choice, then you specifically want that. But you've been asking me a lot of questions that allow me to go in directions that hopefully are useful. But you're not saying, Shane, yes or no, is storytelling important? Yes. Yeah. Okay. That's not what you're trying to find out. But if you said, Shane, can you tell me about the importance of storytelling? Is it because it's good for business, or is it because it's good for relationships, or is it because it's good for sales? I might answer that question in a more narrow way because you've given me these guardrails. Yeah. And also, you're taking more time asking the question when I could be answering the question. So that is a common one. Don't ask multiple choice questions when you want to, unless you want them, a multiple choice answer. On the other side of it, how can you use asking good questions to be more thoughtful, more innovative, to put together better ideas? I'm a big fan of the scientific method. When we were kids and we built volcanoes in school, and they taught us that science starts with an observation, and then you ask a question, and then you have hypotheses, and then you test them. Often we will ask questions, and we're not asking the right question. If we just zoom back to the start of that scientific process and ask ourselves, what is the observation or set of observations that I'm basing this question on, we often will come up with a more interesting or more important question. So an example that I use a lot is, let's pretend that we're working at M&M's, and we're part of the M&M's crew, and the boss comes in and says, hey, sales are down. We need to introduce a new M&M, a new color. I'm going to come back in an hour. Tell me what new color M&M should we introduce. So then we have a debate, black M&M, pink M&M, electric green, whatever. But if we zoom out and we say, well, hey, let's back up. What's the observation that this whole M&M color exercise is based on? This question of what color M&M should we release? It's that sales are down. Well, let's dig into that. Sales are down. Why? Year over year. Let's understand the context. Now, with that observation, what's the question we should ask? Maybe it's actually, how should we increase sales given these circumstances, not which color M&M. A different color M&M might be one hypothesis, but sugar-free M&Ms or different packaging or whatever, it opens up more possibilities. So I think if you have time to formulate questions, back up to what are the observations underlying these questions. And then the final thing that I'll say, and I know I'm spouting out a lot in a short amount of time, is I'm a big fan of the two-part question. Part one is the question you have, and part two is the filter of things that you want to eliminate from the answer set. So how do we increase sales without ruining our reputation or without cannibalizing our current business? How do we, grow this person's investment without, getting them reputational harm, or without, going into this place where, they don't want to go, or whatever it is, without ripple effects, negative second order effects. And I think that's two-part question, that filter at the end for our own thinking process is really powerful. Because you can come up with great answers that then have negative side effects once you've gone down the road too far before you realize them. Another story that I like to use is in Mao's China back in, I want to say, the 50s or 60s. There was this problem of birds eating crops. And so the Ministry of whoever, agriculture, said, how do we get rid of the birds that are eating the crops? And they put a bounty on birds. If you brought a dead bird, you got, $1, whatever the equivalent was. And then the crickets ate all the crops and more crops died. And the question shouldn't have been, how do we kill the birds? It should have been, how do we get the crops to survive? Or how do we get rid of the birds without any negative consequences? Yeah. And so that's, and again, I just used a story to illustrate the example, but the two-part question. Yeah.
I would make Barbie M&Ms with a bag full of pink M&Ms. I think that's that problem.
I dare say that is a great hypothesis.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm
curious, actually, for you, as someone who asks questions, for a living.
For a living?
Do you have what's your heuristic that I could next time someone asks me this, yeah, do you have anything that's your go-to in asking better questions?
My heuristic is, so one it's like starting with just curiosity, right? Like, I don't know, like I'll get in an Uber car, or I'll be in the grocery line, and I'll just say something like something ordinary, like "How's your day going?" Right? And then something will start from there, right? Or so it's just being, I don't know, intellectually curious about everything, right? To me, that's
I
the
like that.
heuristic. It's just just to be willing to. I feel like my kids are always making fun of me. Like, they'll send me TikToks of, like, the classic dad that's making friends with, right, everyone on the street. They're like, Dad says he's not whatever, or that he's, reticent or whatever, but here he is yet again, making friends with strangers. So
Oh,
anyway,
that's fun.
I don't know. I wish I could tell you what the heuristic
No,
is.
I like that. Genuinely wanting to know. I think too often we ask without actually wanting to know. Yeah, hey, how are you? Do you genuinely want to know? If you do, then you're probably bound for much more interesting
Yeah.
outcomes to those conversations.
And,
Yeah.
and, it, and it could be anything, right? You're at Whole Foods and you check out and you ask the cashier, "How's your day going?" And then they'll say, "Oh, I get off work in 5 minutes. I can't wait." I'm like, "What are you going to do after you get off work? Right? Play pickleball? Are you going to, go home and cook? What? Like, I don't know. Just, and it might be just making small talk, but it's also like, it's earnest."
And it's exploring and it's enriching, and I think you apply that in a more business setting, you get more out of those relationships and out of those conversations than you do if you're checking off the list of questions I got to ask. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I like that.
Well, and as a journalist, and you've experienced this too, and I'm sure for me, there was so much psychic income too in meeting
Mm,
people that ordinary people don't get a chance to meet, right?
yes.
So you interviewed, in my case, Peter Lynch or Warren Buffett, or name the person, John Kenneth Galbraith, on and on and on. It was the chance also to do that. So there's
Yeah.
and ordinary people. We'll talk more about that in a second, but so hopefully that helps a little bit, Shane.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I'm
No,
I'm
thank you.
hardly ever right. I'm hardly ever the subject of an interview, so just know that. My life is boring by comparison, for what it's worth. All right,
I don't
so
know that
so
I don't know that I agree, but yeah.
well, yeah. Anyway, so you're going to be talking at an upcoming Investments in Wealth conference in November, I
Yep.
believe it is, right? And
Yep.
so what can attendees expect to learn by attending?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be covering the kinds of things that we've talked about. I think are a good appetizer to the stuff that I'll be covering at the conference. Digging into how innovation and lateral thinking works, and how teamwork and partnerships come together to make that happen. How do you
Yeah,
solve big problems? How do you grow more as a result of people that can push you to do that? And we're going to dig into, I think, some inspirational stuff that will be good for sharing, and talking about. We'll dig into some very specific tactics and the kinds of heuristics that we've been talking about, on the
hmm
storytelling front. We'll dig in more kind of this nexus of story, innovation, and teamwork.
yeah. So I always end every podcast by saying we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that we've missed, or anything that just bears reemphasizing?
Um, I think in terms of reemphasizing this this underlying idea, I mean, kind of a pattern in what I've been talking about is that there are attributes of human nature that are important, and some are built in, and some are sort of learned through experience, or created through experience. And and no matter what the latest technology or trend is out there, whatever newfangled TikTok, VR, headphone, AI, whatever, humans are going to have an affinity for storytelling. They're going to need each other. We're going to need diverse thinking and perspectives. We're going to need to be able to get along even when we're different. And the kind of the math of we can add up to more together if we bring enough different things to the party, and we interact correctly. All of that is foundational, fundamental stuff about human behavior and sort of the science of humanity that will not change just because some new thing takes over for TikTok, or there's some new trend that, alters the investment landscape or the business landscape. And so I think these kinds of human skills, and human understanding will help us no matter what crazy things happen in the future. And I have the feeling over the next few years, a lot of crazy things are going to happen in a lot of fields. And, and we'll get through them together with each other, and understanding people and believing in people and trying to understand what about each other helps make us better is going to be a big part of that puzzle that we need to solve when, more things come.
So I lied. There's one last question.
Okay.
And so I'm a big fan of storytelling festivals. Here in Massachusetts, we used to have something called the Three Apples. I ran a storytelling festival here in where I live a few dozen years ago called Heads and Tails. Anyway, I've always been amazed at professional storytellers, and I'd be curious if you have any thoughts about whether we should encourage people who are watching, listening to this podcast, to attend a storytelling festival to sort of see how it's done and to learn.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Attend that. And I think to this curiosity point, pay attention to how the story is told. If you do it as an exercise, and like, how do they start? How are they getting me to feel things? How are they getting, how are they building the arc of this story? Also do this when whatever TV show you like the most, or whatever movie you next watch, pay attention to how that story is unfolding. And simply by paying attention to that, you will start to recognize the patterns. But I think absolutely going to, I want to go to this. I want the details on the festival. But yeah, I think there's nothing but benefit to that kind of exploration.
Yeah. All right, Shane. We've my boss will yell at me if we keep talking.
Okay. Okay.
So I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. It's so greatly appreciated, and we look forward to you speaking in November at the conference.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff, so it's my pleasure, and I look forward to it.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Advisor podcast, brought to you by the Investments in Wealth Institute. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or our website at www.investmentsinwealth.org/podcast to get the latest episodes of our Exceptional Advisor podcast series. For additional resources, updates on events, and exclusive membership deals, visit www.investmentsinwealth.org.